All right, well, let's start with your why for competing in HYROX or any other sport that you've done in the past. What's like the big why behind it?
I think for me, the biggest thing that I can say is why I do sport is I've been in sport for a very long time, since I was probably at school. And I've always needed some sort of like structure and some sort of routine. And I'm sure we'll touch upon this in a little while, but where I've kind of been in running for so many years, and now I've kind of come to sort of, I guess, the end of my career with that. HYROX sort of come about in my sort of like radar, sort of 2021 or 2022, that I sort of first sort of saw it come up on social media, and I was like, oh, that looks a bit of me. And while I'm like not doing so much running, I was going through quite a severe injury at the time. I couldn't do any running, and that was sort of something that I had my eyes set on, purely from a, you know, with the race or with HYROX being sort of predominantly running based. I knew that actually that would kind of like suit me. So as soon as I was able to run, which was 2022 or 2023 in March, I started to sort of train for HYROX. And then I did my first one last December. So yeah, almost a year ago now.
Okay. All right, great. So you've touched there on like running is your background. Can you tell us a bit about, the sports that you've done since you were young, how you got into running and what your career was like in running as well?
So like I said earlier, like predominantly like I did a lot of sport at school, pretty much most sports teams, to be honest with you. I guess I was never really like great at all of them, or one set sport. And then I sort of tried out the cross country, which my PE teacher sort of forced me into, which I wasn't quite keen on. Anyway, I sort of was pretty good at it, and went to the English schools, which is basically like where all of the under 20s athletes go for school. So if you're any good, you'll run for your county at that. Following that, I kind of was like continuing to train with a local club. And then things kind of really sort of blossomed as I went to university at sort of 18 years old, when I really started to get quite good. So as an 18-year-old, I was being like picked for England for cross country. I was also running sort of a low 14-minute 5K, and a very low minute, like 30-minute 10K. So from there onwards, it was almost like I'd sort of found my sport, which, again, it sort of gave me purpose of why I trained, because I've always wanted to, for me, like to do sport. It's always been about, if I'm going to train for something, I'm going to train hard. I'm not always about like I just train to kind of keep fit, because I've always got that kind of, I guess I'm kind of addicted to the competition side of it and the competing side. So yeah, that was always predominantly like why I kind of chose into cross country, and then kind of pulled away from all of the other sports. And that just kind of like, for me, was then kind of led on to sort of track work and road racing. And then as I sort of reached, I think it was 20, I'd already sort of been competing for England sort of three or four seasons, sort of over the cross country and some road. It was the, yeah, 2009 was the first year that I actually ran for Great Britain, at the European Cross Country Championships. And from there onwards, it was really kind of me. That was my sport, and that was me and my identity. And I was doing quite well on the circuit as an under 20, as an under 23. And yeah, from there onwards, really, it's kind of just been a progression, until sort of my mid 20s, until I got significantly injured.
Okay, okay. And let's go. Just going back to, like you said, when you first did your cross country, like your teacher wanted you to do it, and you were just decent. Was that just? Do you feel? Do you look back and feel like there was anything that happened previously? Was it just all the sports that you were doing, and the volume of sports that you were doing up to that point that made you decent at that point?
Think so. I think, when you look back to, when you look back to school, and you think the fundamentals of sport, and I think if any of your kids are doing sport, or any kids are doing sport at school, and you pick up that kind of like foundations quite early on, and whether that be like the strength or speed, agility, like I was always like fairly fit at school. And like while I say I was never really that good, I was okay at stuff. But I think because I was doing a lot of sport and I was keeping active all of the time, I think that just kind of like helped me to build that like base early on with cross country. And where I was playing sort of football, I was able to sort of run up and down the pitch, you know, quite freely, like back and forth. And then obviously that just kind of like helps with being a decent runner, and having like a decent engine and decent stamina to keep going. So I think for me, like the whole sort of like long distance running sort of really suited me as an individual and my sort of build.
Yeah, yeah. How was it competing for Great Britain?
It's a bit surreal, to be honest with you. I didn't think like so competing for England and Great Britain is very different. Like England's kind of like the first sort of tier of where you would, I guess, compete in terms of running sense. But competing for Great Britain is like a pretty big thing, and it didn't really sink in until I'd got there, and I had to train really, really hard to make the team that year. So it's top six past the post, and I was third in the trials. So did my job what I needed to. And it was just a like a super surreal like sort of moment for me, and it was a bit out of like my comfort zone, well, as it would be for most people, to be honest with you, because when you go away with trips, you go away with a team and they have a certain way of doing things. You have to go into like a call up room, you do your warm up, and it's not like just turn up to a normal race where you can do your normal warm up and then go straight to the start line. You have to be like checked with like your spikes like through administration, and there's so many like little things to it, like even like drug testing and everything else that comes with it. So it can be a little bit daunting. It certainly is. Like I was an under 20, so I was quite young at the time, and you know, to be drug tested at that age was for me, I was like, this isn't like natural, and it took me. It was quite an awkward experience, being in that scenario.
Yeah. Apart from those like slightly odd experiences or things you wouldn't necessarily expect or whatever, or wouldn't commonly happen at a lower level, were there any things that you feel, I don't know, like being surrounded by these elite athletes, do you feel like there are any traits that you picked up as a result of being in that environment as well, like beneficial traits? Like obviously there's all the drug testing and all the stuff that whatever you don't necessarily want to do, but were there, you know, were they noticeably more dialed in with their diet or their warm ups or just their attitudes in general? Anything like that springs to mind?
Certainly, I think when you're looking up to certain athletes, and I think for me as a junior athlete, the one person that I could probably look up to that most people on this podcast would know is Mo Farah. So he was predominantly in a lot of the senior men's teams, you know, when I was in the junior team. So when you go to like these European cross country champs or the world cross country champs, you have like an age group. So under 20, under 23 and senior, and he would always be, I guess, in the seniors at the time. So you do look at those elites and you look at how they prepare for a certain race, and you know, the night before that they'll have like their meal and they do it in a very methodical way, and constantly like keeping hydrated. Their warm up routine is quite different to a lot of people's, in the sense that when you're quite young, you don't really have any real sort of structure to your warm up. I guess like for me, it was almost like, okay, I'll go for a little jog, like 10, 15 minutes, and I might do like a couple of strides. Whereas they're doing a jog for like in the morning before the race, then they'll do a warm up, and then they'll do their mobility work, then they'll do like their foam rolling and their stretching and their drills and their strides. So everything like was a lot more sort of targeted, specific, and tailored to them. But you could see like the difference in level, and even from, you know, being an under 20, like there was certainly people within my age group who were well developed at that time, and they were doing like proper routine warm ups. And for me, it was almost like, I've kind of felt a little bit out of place with that. But I think that was where I was obviously so young, making, you know, teams. I didn't necessarily have that experience that I have now. So like normally when I turn up to a race now, that what I was looking up to, that's me now. So I will do my warm up, my mobility, my drills, my strides. So I guess I've kind of picked up all of that over the years, and yeah, hopefully that kind of like now like shows to the younger athletes from what I'm doing, that they can then bring that into their range training.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned like at 18 you're at like low 14s for a 5K, low 30s for a 10K. What is your PB out of interest? Is it around that level?
Yes, rough. I'd have to look, but I think it's 14:18 that I ran. And that was on the road. Slightly slow on the track, about 14:25. And then my PB for 10K is just over 30 minutes. I think it's 30:08. But that was obviously a long time ago when I'm 18, and things have obviously come along a lot since then. Obviously, we've got now the technology with shoes, which help out massively. Like, I was wearing horrible shoes, which are just painful to wear. Like, you wouldn't even look at them now, and it's just, yeah, things have come on a lot since then. And yeah, I ran a lot of my PBs as a junior, but as I sort of mentioned earlier, like, I guess my sort of running career was kind of stinted, just purely because I'm an athlete that has always been sort of domed with a lot of injury over the years, which is kind of, I've never been able to get any consistency within training.
Okay. I was going to ask about, like you said, about the injury, significant injury, and I know you've had a few. Is there, like, now you look back now at your career and anything like that, do you feel like there were any mistakes that you made that maybe led to those injuries, or like anything that you've learned from those injuries?
I think any athlete would want to go back and try and change certain things with how they've done like certain like training varieties and whatnot. And I think the thing that I can always look back on is when I was younger, like, I was in a group of lads who we were all sort of like competing for England and Great Britain at the time, all based up in little old Norfolk. And I think we were all just doing the same stuff. Like, we just did a lot of running. We did a lot of targeted kind of like sort of interval and tempo work, but probably not so much strength work as a junior. And maybe that's probably something that over the years that I probably should have incorporated more. Certainly from a point of view of like being strong enough to tolerate the load of, the constant pounding of running. Where, now I'm obviously doing a lot more strength work, probably more strength work than I am than I am running. So I think if I could go back, I would definitely try and incorporate a lot more strength work just to avoid like any of those nasty injuries that I've had.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like you said about doing the strength work, so let's talk about like HYROX. You've obviously got into HYROX, and you talked about how that come about. Are you all in on HYROX now? Has that got your focus?
Lee, I think, yeah, I mean, I'm all in as much as I certainly can be. I'm sort of approaching racing HYROX the same way I would be that I would have done, back from my running. So, I'm very much training as hard as I can, with it being specific enough. There's been quite a change in the way that I've kind of had to train. Certainly from back when I was running, it's not all about the running. Obviously, HYROX is predominantly a running race, right? But there's had to be a lot of integration within the strength training, which is something that I've never had to do. So trying to put muscle mass on has always been, quite difficult for me because I've got a physical job as well. So to keep the weight on is relatively difficult. But yeah, like the whole kind of HYROX thing for me at the moment, I'm very much enjoying, and it's something that I wanted to do earlier, but obviously I couldn't because I was injured. But like I say, I've only been less than a year now. And yeah, like I say, I'm really, really enjoying it. It's definitely given me something to focus on and kind of fill that void of not being able to compete in terms of running like that highly anymore.
Yeah, yeah, good. It's probably worth saying, because people will be able to relate to this. I think you had one of the fastest run times in Nice at the World Championships, right? Which was 26:34 total run time, which was over 2 minutes faster than the ultimate winner, the ultimate fastest person on the day in the age groups. So very, very quick run time. So like you said, you're working on the strength. Are there certain stations that you struggle more on and others? Is it all the strength-based ones? Are there any in particular?
I think, look, I'm only 66 kilos, so that's a lot lighter than most people who are in HYROX. I think most people are sort of 75 to 90 kilos. So for me, the sleds are a big one. Not so much a sled push, but certainly the sled pull. Just don't literally have the weight behind me to pull it quite so freely as some of the bigger guys. And then the lunges I'm not too bad at, but the wall balls, like, I just suck at. Like, they're just super hard. Like, I've got tiny little shoulders, and to throw a 9 kilo ball is, for me, is really hard. And I think it was like 7 or 8 minutes at the Worlds, because I almost had a massive meltdown, almost fainting at the end with it being such a hot venue. But yeah, like those, certainly the sled pull and the wall balls for me are just brutal. I really, really struggle with them.
Okay. What do you think is possible for you? Is 61 minutes your PB in the pro division at the moment?
So I've only done 2 pro races. I did Copenhagen, and I did obviously the Worlds. So yeah, I think for me, like, goal wise, I want to run a sub 60, but how far under that, I don't really know how far I can go. Like, obviously, for me, it's always going to be quite difficult because I'm a much smaller person. Obviously, I can rely on the running to a certain point, but I think there's only so much strength that I can put on to help me with that. So there'd probably be a bit of a flaw. Whereas I feel like most of the other guys that are coming from the other side, where they're like really strong, I feel like that they can get quicker, in terms of the running, quicker than I can get stronger, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How about like the other divisions in HYROX? So I know you've done a 57 in the Open, and then there's the doubles as well. Do you feel like you're more suited towards those? Are they going to get more focused in the pro division? How are you feeling about like what you're focused on within HYROX?
So yeah, I'm still focused on running like a really quick time in the pro division. I'm going to open up with an Open this year just to see where I'm at. I mean, if I could find a really quick partner, so if anyone's listening, and they want a quick partner for the pro doubles, then just obviously message me. But yeah, I want to run a quick time over the pro, and I think that's kind of like where it lies, to be honest with you. Certainly with the whole changing of the qualifications, certainly for the world champs and things like that. So yeah, I'll definitely be targeting more sort of pro races, to be fair.
Yeah. Okay. And like I mentioned the doubles, 'cause I guess with the elite doubles and the elite 15 doubles now, I guess that is becoming attractive to other other people that maybe do struggle a little bit more than some of the bigger guys in the pro division. So yeah, I can see there's like going to be a lot of fast guys trying for those doubles teams as well.
Just trying to find a decent partner and someone that hasn't already got a decent partner.
Yeah. Well, there should be some fast people listening to this, I would think. Let's talk about your training, your running training. Let's start with, does it look much different now to what it did when you were doing just running? Tell us what the main changes are there.
Mileage is a big one. So my overall sort of volume is significantly less. And again, that comes down to sort of a lot to do with my injury. So I probably, back then, I was doing sort of around 80 to 100 miles a week. Whereas now I'm probably, right now I'm only doing 20, so significantly less.
What would you ideally be doing now? Like, if you were injury free, where do you think you would be sitting now?
I think for me, like, in terms of what I need for HYROX, probably about 40 miles a week, I think is what, 35 to 45 miles a week roughly. So I'm a little bit down on that at the moment, but it'll increase. Like, there's still early days within the season at the moment. But in terms of like the split, what I would see myself doing would be sort of like one combination kind of session. So sort of targeting more sort of zone 4, zone 5, sort of heart rate training zones. There'll be one long run session, so a longer run with a lot of threshold in it, and then just a couple of like sort of easy zone 2 runs.
Okay. So, within the long run, that's not just easy. You would put threshold work within that long run, yeah.
So essentially, like, it would be anywhere between sort of 75 minutes and probably 90 minutes. But within that kind of 90-minute block, I would probably do sort of 30 to 40 minutes at threshold. So it might be something like 8 by 5 minutes off like a minute float jog recovery, or it might be like 4 by 12 minutes, or 4x10 minutes, something like that. So essentially like that tempo pace in the middle would probably be my HYROX pace. So somewhere around the 3:15 km pace, 3:20, of a very short recovery, with a warm up and cool down on the other side. So you end up running probably like a high end sort of zone 3 for like the whole run essentially.
And then, like you mentioned, like the faster stuff, like more zone 4, zone 5. What does that look like? What's the like the length of those intervals that you might be doing in that?
So it does vary, obviously, depending on what part of the season it would be at. But so in terms of like those variation sessions, I probably wouldn't do any more than sort of, I guess, 35 minutes worth of total effort. And how that is broken down, it might be something like, so when I talk about the whole variation in sessions, it's about, for me, it's like the whole sort of stimulus and how that can mirror to actual HYROX. So um, as I said before, like I'm not a massive, people would have seen me say this, but I don't do any compromise running. I don't do any sled work with running or ergs or anything like that. So I literally focus purely on my strength and I focus on my running. And the way that I can try to get that same stimulus from the running is by doing that combination session of a zone 4 and zone 5 session. So that, in terms of how that might look, in terms of mirroring the HYROX way, is you might do some threshold on the front end of the session, which is going to be like zone 4. So just say 3:20 for me, and say an 8-minute tempo of a 2-minute like sort of float recovery. Then we're going to try and like raise the heart rate. So essentially we want to raise the heart rate. We want to raise like your lactate as pretty much as high as it can go, and then have a really short recovery off that. So we're trying to mirror what the sleds are going to do, mirror what the burpees are going to do, the wall balls where you're really going to spike your heart rate. So you might do something like 6 to 8 by 2 minutes, like really, really hard, of 60 seconds. So we've done like another block in the middle, but then on the end of the session, we might do like another 8-minute threshold. So we've got high heart rate, we've got high lactate, but then we've got to get our body used to dealing with those higher heart rates and lactate within our legs, which is exactly the same as how we're going to be running on a race day in a HYROX. So you can get the same stimulus from doing a session like that, as opposed to actually having to do, any sort of sled work. And essentially, like when you're doing those types of sessions, compromise running, you're just going to get unwanted fatigue and your legs are going to feel heavy for days after that. Whereas if you do a specific run session and you hit all of those right training zones off the right recovery and the right variation with the right stimulus, you're going to get the same benefit as what you're going to get by doing what you would do on the race day. So everything is going to feel quite normal and the same as what it should be on the race day.
Okay. Is there not an argument that like there's the muscular fatigue, if you like, from doing a sled push, like muscularly you're being tested there and then got to go into a run, whereas from a high heart rate run, it's not testing the muscles quite so much, or would you not agree with that?
No, I would agree with it. Yeah. I think just personally for me, like I've tried to do the compromise running and it just hasn't, I guess what it hasn't done is translate in my performance, in the sense that it hasn't necessarily paid off, but equally like I'm really, really like sort of tired for 3 or 4 or 5 days after. Whereas if I do the run session, I can continue to train at a level up here as opposed to down here, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I know you've been in, like you've not been in HYROX for years and years and years. But have you changed your approach or thoughts around training for HYROX at all? Say in the last 6 months, for example, to what you initially thought. Any sort of anything spring to mind there?
Not really. I think so. What I just sort of spoke about with the long run session and the combination session, that was something that after I'd done my first HYROX, I was like, I knew what was needed. And I think prior to going into that sort of like first HYROX, I was just doing a lot of just normal sessions, like what I would say is like maybe 10 by a K, 6 by a mile, just general kind of sessions, which is which will give you so much stimulus, but then actually like it's not giving me enough stimulus for the actual race. So I've had to change the way that I think about training and the way that I coach my athletes to how they're going to get the maximum amount of benefits and gains to kind of be the best that they can be at HYROX. So I think I've always kind of trained like that in those types of sessions as soon as I've kind of come into HYROX. And I would have done like some of those types of sessions over the years anyway, but that for me personally, I think they're the sessions that will get you fittest the quickest, as opposed to just doing your standard 12 by 400 or 8 by a K, because they're great sessions, but it's just the same stimulus throughout. Like there's no change of pace, there's no change of recoveries, and that doesn't necessarily stimulate the body enough, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So I know you've got a coaching business. You're working with a lot of athletes. A couple like I know of, like got age group world records in Poznan recently, which was Robert Van Heek and Sam Pretty. Is there anything that in particular that like of interest worth talking about within their training that has led to their improvements and their fast times? Like I know Robert, for example, has got drastically quicker over the last year or so. Yeah, anything in their training, or is it really just like the approach that you've taken about over time?
Yeah, so Robert's been with us for about eight to 10 weeks, and Sam's been with us or been with me since for about 8 months now. And I think when we first got both of those athletes, we could see that actually what they were doing was a lot of what I just spoke about in terms of not necessarily having enough variation within their run training. So, you know, for us to take away, I guess, those and then bring in those different types of sessions where they're going to stimulate differently. I think they're now sort of seeing the benefits of that. Obviously, they both ran a world record for their age group. And, you know, it only just goes to show that they're now starting to do those types of sessions. And, you know, if you look at their actual splits, you know, within those HYROXes that they've done, they've managed to come off every station and be able to hit the run quite hard, without having like any like sort of that fatigue that you might like get from the sleds or the burpees and so forth. So obviously it's all opinion, and everyone's still trying to find the perfect way to train for HYROX, and there's no right or wrong answer. Definitely not. But I think with what we're kind of setting and what we're seeing with a lot of our athletes now is they are making like really good gains. There's only another example of another athlete that I'm coaching, like from last season to this season, he's improved by 25 seconds per kilometer time, which is massive. Like, so he's now running around sort of the 4-minute mark as opposed to the 4.5-minute mark, which just from doing a summer like of training over 3 months, like he's improved drastically. And there's plenty of other athletes who are really sort of starting to improve their running, and you know, their HYROX 1K times are really sort of like coming down by, on average, probably like 15 seconds, I would say.
Nice. Okay. How do you think about? I know you mentioned like there's a couple of like easy zone 2 sessions in quite commonly. How do you think about like the importance of doing those versus junk miles, what someone might call junk miles, and miles that you don't necessarily need to do? Is there? I mean, obviously there's a balance there. How do you know where that point is?
And I don't want to sound like it's going to come across a little bit cliche, but it does. It can depend on the individual, like purely from I guess like someone that's maybe more of a hobbyist as opposed to someone who's doing it more elite. I think there's a bit of a misconception with sort of like junk mileage. We can all do a little bit too much of it, and actually like we could maybe, all of us, we could probably get away with doing slightly less mileage and getting more benefit through it, because actually like when you look at the junk mileage, it just adds unwanted fatigue. So, you know, for some people they might actually do an extra two or three like zone 2 runs, but actually like they're maybe not necessarily needed. We could maybe jump on the bike and not have the impact. But I think training for HYROX, I believe that you probably need maybe 1 or 2 zone 2s anymore. And I just, with everything else that goes on in terms of like maybe people's routine with their strength, they're probably doing 2 to 3 sessions a week, then they're doing the HYROX conditioning, maybe some at work. You end up like having 8 or 9, 10 sessions. And for the ordinary person that isn't lucky enough to be an elite athlete or sponsored, that's a lot to fit in around, family time and everything else without, trying not to get injured essentially. So I guess like for most people, you're just trying to maximize the amount of training that you can do on sort of the minimum, not the minimum requirement, but what you can get away with, like to get the best possible, like kind of performance output.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you feel like, it's maybe a stupid question, do you feel like running technique is important, and do you try and work on running technique with your athletes?
Times if they've got like some sort of gait issues. So predominantly like with a lot of runners, we tend to see like sort of similar injuries. And it normally comes from sort of like glute and lower back work. So we have to sort of like integrate sort of running drills or some sort of like glute and hip activation or lower back kind of exercises, because what we normally find is with runners, like they can often have like a hip tilt. So then once they've, depending on how they are, like some people can pick up like injuries in the lower like posterior chain, so calf and hamstrings, whereas it's not necessarily related to that. So we actually have to change sometimes the way that we run, because mechanically we're not strong enough to be able to withstand like the quicker sessions or the zone 2 sort of mileage. So sometimes, but again, it really does depend on the individual. Most people like when they run, they're normally okay, unless they've really got like I guess like a serious problem with, yeah, their running gait. But we don't see loads of it, but enough to, set some people, like the running drills can help with obviously their technique and their running form, which can then help with all of like your running efficiency and your running economy. Obviously you're using a lot less energy when you're running at pace.
Okay. And how about treadmill versus running on the road or a track? Do you have an opinion on that? Are you indifferent to it?
Think for most people, I think it's good to use all of it. I think for a lot of like your easy and your zone 2 runs, I think go outside and get used to running outside. If you're wanting to do like your quicker sessions, I would certainly advise maybe doing them on the track, or somewhere where you've got like a really quick road loop, which you get used to sort of like running at speed. I'm not against running on the treadmill, but obviously the treadmill does all the work for you. Certainly if you set it at, let's say, 330 km, obviously as you're running, the belt's still spinning, so you're not actually running for 1 kilometer because the belt's spinning like underneath you. So I think it's all about kind of getting engaged with that actual pacing of what it's going to feel like on the day. And it normally feels quite different on a treadmill to doing it outside. So most people will be able to hit pace on a treadmill. And it does serve a purpose. Certainly like in the winter, if it's wet and it's cold outside or it's icy, like you need to do a session, fine, jump on the treadmill. If it's windy, like you want to hit pace, you need to hit a certain target, then great. But equally, I think running outside, running on a track or a road loop where you can really sort of like engage with your body's biomechanics and running at a certain pace to know how that actually feels. So when you like transfer that into a HYROX day, your body's already almost in tune with like what it's going to feel like. I think personally, it feels very different to running on the treadmill to running outside on the road for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, let's ask everyone's favorite question: your footwear for HYROX. What's your choice?
So mine's obviously as a Saucony ambassador, I obviously are quite restrictive for what I can wear, but the Saucony Pro 3 for me, the Saucony Endorphin Pro 3. So they've obviously been discontinued, and we've now got Pro 4 out. Pro 5 would be out next year, I believe. I can't remember the date, but so yeah, I've got a last pair which I literally just use to race in, and they go back in the box straight after the race because they're just, for me, like they're just perfect. Like they're durable, they've got enough stability, they're fast, they've got enough grip for the sleds personally. And I think it obviously shows with a lot of the elite athletes are wearing the Saucony Pro 3s or the Pro 4s, or it's really Puma, isn't it? Like there's no other sort of leading shoe companies that are in HYROX at the moment. I'm sure that they're probably making shoes to try and compete with the other brands, though.
Yeah, yeah. I think there'll be more and more coming in. You said about like protecting your Pro Frees, and you only racing those like they go back in the box. So you're training in a different shoe. Would you, let's say you had an endless supply of Pro Frees, would you not train in those? Like you still want to like use a different shoe for training?
So for me, I don't ever train in a carbon shoe because I feel like it's a bit of a prized possession and it should feel like a luxury when you put it on race day. So for me, like I'll put on the Pro 3 for a HYROX, or I'll put on the Pro 4 for like a road race. But to train in, I would use something like the shoe underneath that. So that's the Endorphin Speed. So still very similar to the Pro 3, but it has a nylon plate and not a carbon plate. So just a little bit softer on the foot. And I just use that to train in, and then obviously I'd use a different shoe to do all of my sort of zone two work on. But yeah, for me, like I don't get caught up on running in the carbon shoe all of the time, just purely for sort of like running biomechanics. I feel that is a really good idea for you to utilize different shoes. Certainly for, you know, I say back to your mileage days, like use a really sort of chunky, like soft shoe to recover. Like you don't need to be using a carbon shoe to do those easy runs in. And the same like with a session shoe, like I would use something slightly different. So when the race day comes, it's more of that luxury and I feel faster and I've not got used to just running in the same shoe every single day.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. I asked you about the PB in the 5K and 10K earlier, but where do you think you're at now? Like, so you ran a 26:34 total run time in Nice at the Worlds. What sort of 5K, 10K time do you think you'd do it around that time?
So I've not done any running over the summer at all since the Worlds. So I got injured in July, and I've only really just started running about 3 weeks ago. So I guess them at probably 15:45 maybe. I could probably muster up and maybe a 32 minutes at the moment, I'd say. But you know, like I say, come January, like that'll be down to 14:45, 14:50, I would say.
Is that where you'd say you were at Nice? Like that's what you could have done.
I was there back in March, when I did Copenhagen. So it was like 26:03, I think, my total run time there. And I probably was in about 14:30, 14:40 shape then. But I wasn't, again, I'd got injured before the Worlds. I just literally get injured all the time. So for me, like to get the consistency within training, it can always be quite difficult. So I would probably have said I was in about 15-minute shape at the Worlds roughly. So
Okay, all right. And we have a few questions to finish up with, but one I just want to ask you about mindset during a race, like during a running race or during HYROX. Where does your mind go to help you in those like tough periods?
think a lot of it goes back to sort of my days within running. Look, I think, you know, in a race, any race, there's always going to be dark periods. You're going to have like those periods where it's really hard. But let's be honest, like pain's temporary and you're going to come out of it the other side no matter what. And it's only going to last for a certain period of time. And my best kind of like way to describe it is when you're doing a marathon and, you know, you can feel great for 10 miles, but then you can literally like go into a massive hole like straight away. But then when you look at it, you still got a long way to go. But if you're headstrong and you know that you've done the work and you're willing to graft, like you will come out of it the other side. So I think for me, like I've always found that yes, it's going to hurt for a small period of time, but just keep pushing and keep pushing because actually like that period of time might only last for a minute or two. Certainly in HYROX, like, you know, certainly the burpees, they're gonna suck for 2.5, 3 minutes. But after that, it's like, okay, I can get back into my running now and that pain's gone. Like there's no point dwelling about it in the middle of the race, like, because you need to be getting on. So I think for me it's just, yeah, pain is temporary, it won't last forever.
Okay, nice. Couple of questions to finish up on. What's been your best ever sporting experience?
Probably my first ever GB international call up. So 2009 for the European Cross Country Championships, finishing 29th as an individual, and we finished second team. So that was, for me, that was probably like one of my highlights. And there's equally been other sort of GB representations, you know, that equally as special. But I think my first one certainly up there with being the best.
Yeah, nice. How about your toughest?
Me, it's definitely injury. I have been plagued with injury, you know, from a very young age, which has been really difficult. Certainly from the point of view like where you can't get any consistency within training. So my biggest injury was probably my stress fracture that I got as soon as I went out to America. So I was offered a full sports scholarship at the age of 22, like after finishing university out here. So for me, that was, I'm going to go out to America for 2 years and run and be on the track and cross country team. And I was only there for 4 days, and I was sort of diagnosed with a stress fracture in my tibia, which was quite a difficult one to take because certainly as I'd gone out there to run and do nothing else, but it sort of hindered me for the next sort of 18 months while I was out there because it didn't heal right. And yeah, I had lots of complications with it. So it took me a while to get going again. So I think the injuries over the years has certainly been the toughest thing for me over just running.
Yeah, yeah. What's the best piece of advice someone's given you or you've discovered while training for HYROX?
The same as everyone else. It's don't go out too hard. I think for me, in my first HYROX, that just completely went out of the window and I went out too hard. And when I got to the sled push, I found out that actually, like, yeah, you need to kind of be a little bit more patient early on and not push too hard. I think I was in that mindset of like, okay, I can go out at 3-minute K and I'll be fine. But I come off the sled push and it wasn't pretty. So yeah, I think, yeah, just don't go out too hard, run your own race, and don't get sucked into what other people are doing.
Okay. And then lastly, if you could plant one idea or piece of advice in the mind of everyone listening, and it can be anything, what would it be?
A little bit similar to what I've just said. I think with everyone like doing HYROX, you know, we've got hobbyists and we've got elitists, and I think there's not one plan that fits all. So I think trust in your own process, trust in your own training plan. I think HYROX at the moment is very social media driven. And I think everyone looks at what everyone else is doing and think, I need to do that. Whereas actually, if you've got a training plan, just stick to it. Don't maybe dibble and dabble of what everyone else is doing. I think you need to stick on the same path and see it out. And if it doesn't work, then try something different. But if you're constantly looking at what everyone else is doing and then implementing that into your own training, that isn't necessarily going to be what's right for you as an individual, because we're all different. We all have different jobs. We're all at different levels. And what works for Hunter McIntyre might not work for Ash Harrell. You know, like there's so many different like variations within training. I think you just need to get on one path and stick with it and see it out. Because I think if you're pulling from loads of things different together, that's just when people break down, they get injured, and then they get disinterested with it all.
Yeah, yeah. Time and consistency is underrated at times, yeah.
Everyone wants to fix the quick fix, and not prepared to put in, you know, like a training phase or a training cycle. And I think with obviously the social media, everyone's looking at everyone and thinking, oh, well, they're getting there like quicker, so I need to do that. So I think just look at what you're doing in your own training and just be consistent with it. There's no shortcut. There's no cutting of corners. Like, you'll only get out what you put in. So if you're prepared to graft and do what you need to do in your own training, you will, like, obviously you'll get out what you put in.
Yeah. What's your race plans in HYROX coming up? Have you got any races booked?
A couple, yeah. So I've been a bit slow to enter in this year, just purely because I've been injured. So I've got an entry for London. So I will be doing the Mens Open just purely as a bit of a see where I'm at. I didn't want to enter pro just to start with, but I've got Vienna booked after Christmas, so the European champs, and then I've got Copenhagen booked in the pro at the moment. So that's it at the moment. So we've got 3, but we'll see how we go at London as to see whether I maybe enter some more.
Okay. Let's see if anyone reaches out. It's a fast doubles partner as well.
You know, yeah, I mean, I think Glasgow is just around the corner, and that's one of the majors, I believe, for qualifications, isn't it?
Glasgow is not an elite doubles qualification. No. It's a major race, like for the elite 15 individuals, but it's not a doubles qualification. No, don't think so. But no.
I'll have to look into that one then.
Well, thank you for this. It's been great, really useful. If people want to follow you, find out more about you and so on, where should they go?
Just social media. So Instagram is what I'm predominantly on. So that's ash.harrell. Or if you're looking for a bit more in my coaching business, it's AJH Coaching.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you for this, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, mate.